Mini episode 1151 of the FDH Lounge is brought to you by Sportsology, delivering unconventional columns and webcasts about sports, TV, music, movies, and more. Follow them on the web at sportsology.com.
The FDH Lounge. You'll want to schedule your life around it.
A long time ago, on a gloomy, wet Cleveland spring night, two men stand alone amidst the late-night drizzle. Their voices echo across the vacant station parking lot as they debate the merits of the great American radio show that have been missing for far too long. On that night, an idea was born. That idea became the FDH Lounge. Welcome to the FDH Lounge.
Hello and welcome to FDH Lounge mini episode 1151. I'm FDH managing partner Rick Morris, and it's a tradition in the FDH Lounge to review some of our finest guest appearances from the last 100 mini episodes. These are some of the best moments that we had from mini episodes 1051 to 1150, ones that reinforce the reality that we really are the show where nothing is off topic. You flagged on Twitter that story about the NFL's challenges with insurance, and the fact that there's only one insurer that will take them on anymore for head injuries and that type of thing, and that it presents, I think, a critical risk to the future of the NFL. Because if that kind of stuff gets to be ruled uninsurable by any of the big insurers out there, I mean, it might be melodramatic to say the NFL shuts down, but the challenges in terms of reopening would be just staggering. So I want to commend you for having pointed out that story, because it's way more significant than anybody thinks right now.
Yeah, I mean, I don't use Twitter that often, so I'm surprised you saw that. But I'm more of a Facebook guy. But I saw that, and I just really piqued my interest because, you know, over the next 5 years, I don't know how long it would take for it to, negatively impact the game, but that's a real problem if the insurance carriers don't back the NFL anymore. It just leaves them very vulnerable. Something like that, maybe through collective bargaining agreements, you can kind of stave off those kind of issues because you can address it up front. In the case of those type of injuries, X, Y, and Z would happen instead of just leaving it up to insurance battles. But I'm not an insurance guy by any means, and I don't know exactly how it all works, but I just know that if you try to have a viable business and nobody will cover you, that's really good.
The business climate in this country, things have been really ticking along pretty good the last 2 years plus, but you've got a real stew brewing right now. We kind of talked about this just briefly off air. You've got a number of different factors, whether it be Brexit, whether it be the trade war with China, and you had noted earlier today on Twitter a little bit of a little mini rally on the thoughts that might hopefully be coming to an end. I mean, we've been hoping this for a while, but it hasn't happened yet. You've got that. You've got the government shutdown, which just increasingly appears to be kind of putting a burden on this economy. So, as you're looking at this, I mean, do all of those seem to pose a threat to you at this point in time, some more than others? I mean, as you're looking at the board, basically, how do you kind of slot it out as far as the biggest risks we're facing?
Well, let's triage it, and you outlined perfectly the three biggies, and that is, of course, you're looking at the government shutdown. That's 800,000 Americans who aren't working for the moment, and yes, you can go on and say, oh, they'll get paid eventually. Doesn't matter. Their wallets are shut right now, so they are not spending at a time when all kinds of industry had expected, planned, anticipated that they would spend and buy certain products and engage in certain services and certainly spend money. You then have, of course, the tariffs on China and the steel and aluminum tariffs globally. That is certainly affecting businesses who have to pay the tariffs. The misunderstanding a lot of people have is that they think it's China paying the tariffs. Oh, no. It's U.S. businesses paying tariffs on Chinese goods and materials they need, use, or buy.
Right.
Right. So then there's that, and then, of course, a kind of more of a side window issue is Brexit, the move move between the UK to exit the European Union and what they're trying to do to make sure that's not too much of a chaotic transition. So I would say that right now, it's got to be China that is affecting things the most. Here's why. There isn't an assembly line or a supply chain in America now that isn't touched at some point by China, whether it's rivets or parts or materials that they need from China to make their made-in-the-USA products, or who knows what, they manufacture in China. So it's become an issue, and I've already started to see companies. I just came from the Consumer Electronics Show, Rick, and GoPro, they're among the first. They've already pulled the plug. They're moving some of their U.S.-bound camera production that's on the ground in China out of China. They won't say where they're moving it, but they're moving it. Now, that costs money. Not too much, because they own their equipment. They just need a place. So they're getting rid of the warehouse where they were manufacturing. But other companies aren't so lucky. They outsource their business and their stuff to China. And, at some point, though, we do have to straddle this problem and face it head on. The China cheats. And I respect the president for trying something new, but it's really starting to hurt companies, and I'm seeing that.
When I get to the part, I sort of sympathize with him at a part that I really didn't think that I would. The part about the rededication of the USS Missouri and going there, and where his mother was going to be front and center, and it was going to be in honor of his grandfather, and they were just sort of asking him to put aside his politics and everything like that. I think it's fair from reading this to say that his politics probably don't match up very well with mine, nor my thoughts on family loyalty versus what he ended up doing. But this is one of those weird things, though. I almost weirdly do have sympathy for him because, particularly if he had the thoughts that he did about nuclear weapons, and he seemed to have some issues with that ship having nuclear capabilities. His grandfather is literally the only man in the history of the planet that ever dropped the bomb, and did it twice. So you wonder what kind of a thought that could leave in your psyche, particularly if you come to question the morality of it, as so many have subsequently. So that's a unique and sort of interesting burden to carry around. If you're completely convinced of the righteousness of it, then it's not a burden. If you're not as convinced about it, then that might account maybe for some of why he was as ambivalent, or perhaps worse than ambivalent, about his family heritage.
I think that's very perceptive on your part, and absolutely right. I mean, you contrast Will's experience with his grandfather and the dropping of the atomic bombs with Will's older brother, Cliff. The last time I talked to Cliff, Cliff, first of all, he embraced his family. He is on the board of the Truman Foundation or the Truman College or Foundation or whatever. And at one point, I don't know that he actually succeeded in doing this, but he was going to write a book about his grandfather dropping the nuclear bombs. So he would freely talk about who his grandfather was, and Will never would talk about it. He would get mad at his older brother, angry at his older brother for mentioning to anybody that they were related to Harry Truman, because obviously their last name was Daniel and not Truman. So it wasn't a given like with John F. Kennedy Jr., who his family was and his lineage. So Will felt very ambivalent about all of this, and obviously it all came out at that rededication of the SS Truman with nuclear weapons, and he just freaked out and basically abandoned the family and the ceremony, even after they had sort of spent weeks encouraging him to stay calm. The woman who went with him, who was his good friend, tried to encourage him to keep it together, but he just couldn't do it. And, I think that he was a very complex guy, and I think a lot of that comes through in that section of the book. And one of the favorite lines that he wrote, which I think shows just how complex he was, and, my youngest son pointed this out as well as one of his favorite lines. He wrote a letter to one of his Yale roommates who was living in St. Louis as a lawyer, and he wrote a letter about how he just started dating a new woman, and Will never got married. He was dating a new woman, but he now sort of made it a practice to break up with her before they really got dating to get that out of the way, because he knew that at some point he wasn't going to be able to commit to a long-term relationship, and he was going to have to break up and get on with his life and go in a different direction. And so to sort of shortcut that process, I mean, it was part funny, right, but part very revealing about his own character and his character flaws and his inability to commit to anybody or kind of anything. I thought that was quite revelatory.
In New York, discussing this together in 2012, one of the topics that we were getting on about a little bit at the time was cloud computing, which was something of obviously a newer concept at the time, and you were kind of getting into that in a great degree and doing a wonderful job of kind of breaking it down for our audience. So I'd like to start there because a lot of times I'm fascinated to sort of trace things through the history of our show. We go back to 2007. So in terms of how long we've been around, this is maybe maybe about it actually. Let me correct myself. This is the fastest moving time in human history. So let me take this as a subject example right there. Cloud computing 2012 versus cloud computing today. Alex, how has it progressed?
Well, it's progressed tremendously. I mean, I think in 2012, to sort of flip this on the other hand, which can still be made a very good argument for maintaining your own physical computers in a data center somewhere, and having it, whether you had a whole room full of things or a rack or something else like that. And I think, in the time that's elapsed, really, the ability to have, all the cloud computing resources that you want incredibly inexpensively, and, basically provided on demand as you need them or don't need them, has, come along and displaced really anybody but the most dedicated companies, need to actually maintain their own physical infrastructure. The fact that I can go to Amazon and basically get, any quantity of computing resources that I could possibly imagine, available, and not, just use them for this evening and then let them go. Not have to take any more commitment than that is just mind-boggling. The fact that if I have an incredibly large sum of data stored physically at my location, I can even get Amazon to come send a truck over to transfer all the data to storage and drive it away. It's just mind-boggling. So the whole concept of cloud computing has blossomed to an extent that was really almost impossible to imagine back in 2012. We sort of felt we knew what cloud computing was, and it has moved onward tremendously to the point where we have a tremendous range of services, tremendous range of technologies, tremendous range of providers, and the cost has come down, unbelievably to, probably fractions of a penny on what it used to cost, probably far less than that, maybe 1,000-fold, the compute resources that we could get in the cloud, and the storage resources we get in the cloud have come down. It's just mind-boggling. And it's become ever more useful. You could use them for a tremendous range of tasks, and the technology to solve certain problems is available there now. You need face recognition. You need, artificial intelligence. You need, big bookkeeping tasks. All, there's, go to some place like Amazon. You have libraries and infrastructure that you can rent to solve these problems. Whatever scale you need, and it has really come of age to become something that is unbelievably powerful and was powerful to an extent you couldn't even imagine back in 2012.
Absolutely, and that's one of the things that I enjoy most about our library of shows is that we'll talk about something in a moment of time, and as I say, everything has been so fast-moving in these last dozen years that we've been around that you can go and you can see how it evolved and sort of compare it against what the forecasts were going to be, and it's just incredibly fascinating to me in that kind of a way. I'm going to pivot to you, Gary, on the time frame of the last half dozen years or so in terms of what you thought cloud computing was going to be versus what it is today. How is it the same, and how has it differed in some ways?
I think the most interesting thing that I've noticed is how important it, and this hasn't quite happened yet, it's sort of happening, just starting to happen now, is how important cloud infrastructures have become to what we think of as, smaller or medium-sized businesses. In the startup world, they're very aware of this because a lot of startups start out with a business model that they want to scale to essentially to a global reach, right? But there are lots of established businesses that depend on computing infrastructures of some kind that are starting to take a look at cloud services, because what they're realizing is that even in a small or medium-sized business that has a local or regional reach rather than global, they depend on high availability. And the availability that they can get from a cloud-based infrastructure is sometimes dramatically better than what they can provide for themselves, because it is just so very expensive to provide a high availability system. And that's actually one of the things that sort of drove the original interest in cloud computing was, this idea that if you're a business and you want to have a scalable infrastructure, you have to put enormous investments into things that aren't really a part of your business, and you wind up having to run your own IT shop. So what a lot of businesses are doing now is realizing, and I think kind of finally, some of these opportunities have been available for a while, but I think people were sort of waiting and watching and seeing whether this could really be a thing. So we've noticed in the last year or so, there is an increasing amount of businesses who are starting to explore this, and what they're finding right away is, well, we have these apps that we wrote for our own business that support our business, or that help us engage with our customers in some way. Maybe it's an online, just as simple as an online way for them to buy our stuff, whatever that is. And they need to basically migrate those apps into the cloud, which is not straightforward. It really does require some expertise and some deep thinking about what the nature of that app is. Sometimes you need to throw the app away and start over with a different set of technologies in order to provide the same customer experience, or even a better customer experience, in a way that you can host it on the cloud, reduce your internal IT costs. So I think that's probably the most interesting thing that I've been seeing. I'll give you an interesting example. I can't name the customer, but this is a customer that has a global type system, and this brings up another issue too, and this is another driver. They had a bunch of customers in the United States, and then they started getting customers in Europe over the last probably 10 years or so that they've been in business, and they became a global company. And then suddenly Edward Snowden stuff happened a few years ago, and their overseas customers, some of them became very concerned about the hosting infrastructure being in the United States, and they basically said, we demand that you put a data center in Europe for us. So this company basically looked at their app and said, well, we can't really afford to run multiple data centers around the world. It's the reason we were doing it this way is because we could afford to run one data center really well. We could run 2 or 3 data centers heavily if that's what you want. And they realized that essentially re-implementing their application, or refactoring it, as we say in the software world, that allowed them to put data centers into places that were overseas that their clients could trust. And I'm not saying that they were right. I'm not saying don't trust the U.S. That's not what I'm saying at all. But sure. I'm saying there were customers who were demanding this. And so they refactored their app, hosted it in a cloud infrastructure in Europe, and there's another one in Asia. And that satisfied their overseas clients' requirements for a locally hosted infrastructure without them having to replicate a really expensive data center overseas. And in fact, it worked so well that they eventually shut down their own data center, and they host in the United States on a cloud infrastructure as well.
I'm going to have a little bit of fun with you here based on something you said.
All right.
Okay, because what you said about the Electoral College, let me condense a lot of the talking points of the last year into this, the last couple of years into this little bit of mockery. Trump does nothing but shatter the sacred norms of this country. Also, we need to abolish the filibuster, the Senate, the Electoral College, and we need to pack the Supreme Court. So Trump's the only one shattering norms, huh? That's the thing, Colin. Well, I'm telling you, everybody has started playing his game. You're all getting in the mud pit with Trump.
You would have got it started. It was Newt Gingrich.
I would not disagree.
Mitch McConnell is Newt Gingrich's acolyte.
Yeah.
He learned.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. So basically, you have. Let's just put it this way: a minority of the country, meaning about 2/3 of white people in this country, hell, less than that, 60% maybe, are not terms to the rest of the country forever, right? Like, they can try as hard as they want to entrench minority rule. Let's call it what it is, minority rule. You know, a minority of voters has elected the president 2 times. We are covered by a Supreme Court that has been packed, right? What Mitch McConnell did is unprecedented in our history as a country, right? That's not a norm. That is an unprecedented power grab and a naked one. So in the long run, that will not stand, right? We will do as little damage to the constitutional order as we have to. And I say this as someone who's been talking with a lot of liberal activists for the last few weeks. We're going to do as little damage to the constitutional order, but the dead hand of Ronald Reagan cannot tell a new generation how to operate. They're going to change the rules. Well, I mean, the country belongs to the people who live in it.
That's an existential question, I think, because baseball has to figure out how you square the emphasis on efficiency with all of these teams with keeping people engaged in the game, because I agree with you. It's diametrically opposite right now, one pursuit and the other.
Yeah, I mean, Tony Clark is a guy that I have a lot of respect for. I have reached out to the union about a documentary project that I had in mind. We hadn't been greenlit, so I don't want to talk about it yet. But there was a project that we've been pitching, and I went to the union, and the union gave me their support in terms of access to players.
Okay.
Because that's what we would need to do the show. And the advice I got, this wasn't from Tony Clark directly, but I had just spoken with Tony. I have, friends in the union, and they said, but if you're going to do it, you got to do it soon. I said, why? He says, we're going to take, trust me, they're going to be media blackouts. They're not going to do interviews.
Wow.
And I said, really, you're bunkering down. And this is what I was told. And I was told this is not privileged information, so this is known.
Okay.
Major League Baseball, the Players Association has taken its licensing money. Mm-hmm. That's a central fund that all the video game companies pay for the likenesses of the players and such.
Yeah.
And that goes into a central fund, and that's dispersed to the players.
Yeah.
And they are withholding payments this year on licensing money and starting a strike fund.
Ooh.
And I saw that, and I wasn't. That alarmed me. But then this week, when you read that the union is considering walking before the collective bargaining agreement is over, I was like, sure they are. They're ready. And, when Craig Kimbrell and Dallas Keuchel were free agents in May, all I said was, this is what it looks like. This is what Armageddon looks like. And, I mean, Craig Kimbrell is one of the top 5 closers in the sport.
Yeah.
He was not signed because the metrics said he's not worth the investment. And again, if your argument is you're trying to win and these analytics are telling you this is the not smart way to spend your dollars, I cannot argue with that. Like, if I go on in a market and I say, well, the host will say, well, why didn't the Brewers go after him? Well, why didn't 29 other teams go after him?
Right.
Keuchel, too, it's the same thing. So, this argument that, there's a solution, there's an easy solution to this, I don't think there is. But they are bunkering down. That's why when I've outlined baseball's crisis, mm-hmm. It's a twofold thing. There's a short term and a long term. The short term is how are they going to reinvent themselves after a work stoppage? And because in a sport where they're dealing with apathy, where the word boring is trending on Twitter during your All-Star game, then how will you deal with, it's not going to be the same animosity that people had in the 90s. The 94 strike broke people's hearts.
Yeah.
This won't break people's hearts, not in a mass appeal. So the result will be that's the first part of the crisis. The second part of the crisis, and again, I hate making it sound like it's about me, and it's not, but I'm 45. When I turn 75, so that's 30 years from right now, mm-hmm. I think baseball is not a major sport because if you look at my generation, so I'm in my 40s, and I think that this is the last generation with the passion that I remember from growing up. I think people in their 30s have it, but it's diminishing. But I think once you get down to the 20s and especially the teens, I don't know anybody who's interested. And so what I fear is that when a 15-year-old now is 45, when I'm 75, I wonder what that sport will be. And that's part two of the crisis. And I think that the after effects of a work stoppage will be felt, but what it'll do is, wait a second, you millionaires are walking out. That's what the fan's going to say.
Right.
And then they're going to say, and by the way, your game is not fun.
Right. Yeah, that's true.
To me, that's the crisis, and I don't wish it on anyone.
Right.
But I have yet, and I don't have any faith because, again, I'm not trying to plug this is a podcast,
sure.
So let's plug other podcasts.
Absolutely.
On my Sports with Friends podcast, I have accused Rob Manfred of a lot of issues. Mm-hmm. To the point of a guy who I considered a friend for a long time. I have learned so much information that I have no longer invited him on the podcast. The situation, and if you listen to the episode entitled Baseball Cop, mm-hmm. and which is a book written by a former police detective who worked for Major League Baseball, and then there's another episode where Eddie Dominguez comes back on the show after the David Ortiz shooting. Mm-hmm. If you hear those two episodes, you will have no faith that Rob Manfred has his eye on the prize. And so this sport is rudderless then.
Yeah.
I'm not going to get political on you, but, there is a subconscious about people who are disillusioned with the president.
Yeah.
Right? There's a lot of people, whether you're for him or against him, there are a lot of people who are very, very upset that he's in office.
Sure.
Think about that from a baseball standpoint. If you are a baseball fan, and your team's not in it, and you look at this sport and say, show me a leader. Who's the leader? It's not Manfred. And that's a problem. And the owners are in cahoots with everything he's doing. So he's not going anywhere.
No.
And the problem, I used to worry that the union had gone with their heart with Tony Clark and not with their head, because if you remember, the last two heads of the players' union were lawyers.
Yes.
And I said, you might want to get a lawyer. There's never anything against Tony Clark, but
right.
Don't you want to hire a lawyer? And all that my friends at the union said were, don't worry, we have lawyers. I said, okay, we're good.
Some things that really can't be quantified. First time NFL head coach, albeit one who, again, has a very good relationship with all the key players on the team, was very much respected in his previous capacity on this team. So as you're looking at this team and you're fashioning a model, like I said, I would guess that this would be one of the more challenging ones because of the lack of continuity from the end of last season to this season. But what do you think when you see a team like this as they're incorporating all their different changes?
So I don't think that it's as hard because there's a little bit more known than you think, right? So we have Freddie Kitchens' lineage. We know he has like a Nick Saban component from LSU.
Yep.
We've seen some of the ways that he has worked with Baker Mayfield in the last part of the season. We know a little bit more about, the weapons, obviously, than when you get a guy like Odell, you understand where he goes, and you have Jarvis. You have a lot of well-established players. It's harder when there's a bunch of rookies who, like Arizona, is far more difficult for me to forecast because I don't know how they're going to use Kyler Murray specifically, and I'm not sure what's going on with their O-line. The Browns are not, I'm not going to say they're easy because it's always difficult, but it's not as hard as all that for a couple of reasons. The hardest thing I'm having right now is figuring out your O-line because Zeitler's departure is a big deal.
Yes.
So that's an interesting part of it for me. But as far as our skill players are concerned, I think, you're in good shape. Like the Browns are in very good shape, and it's an exciting year. And the pressure and Myles Garrett is there are a lot of things to be really excited about. So the Browns are actually, for once, not the hardest team by, not even close. They're probably an average team in terms of how to prep for the season and how to kind of anticipate what's going to happen with them.
The actresses who were brought up in this whole college admissions scandal here, you pointed out, I think justifiably so, hey, nobody's talking about Bill Macy. He's married to Ms. Huffman there, and you don't really hear his name out there very much. So some folks manage to remain Teflon even when there's scandals swirling all around them.
Well, that's the question. Did Bill Macy just not have anything as part of it? Right? Is where plausible deniability. By the way, yesterday was Bill Macy's 69th birthday. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
Bill Macy.
Great one.
Yeah, there you go. But that's the question, right? Look, in every family there's a split of who handles what, and sometimes, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. Maybe in this case, Bill Macy, there wasn't enough in terms of the process to say, hey, you're part of this, right? The check comes out of whatever accounts, maybe they couldn't connect him directly. And as I tried to point out, I did a quick periscope when I first heard the news because it became all the rage here in LA because of, USC being part of that, in addition to all the other scandals and problems that they have with the athletic program and going all the way through the university. You've got interim people in important jobs. Lynn Swan today, or I should say for the tape process on Thursday, the talk that Lori Loughlin's husband on a plane with the then USC athletic director, be it Pat Hayden or Lynn Swan, going to Augusta. So there's all those tentacles. And I just always raise my hand and just say, you know what, think about your own community. Think about how many kids may be going to the schools that aren't in district paying property taxes in the town you're in.
Yep.
But because mom or dad, maybe they were there, but then they couldn't afford to stay in district, or maybe it's just an opportunity with grandma's making address, whatever. And not to simplify it and equate those to one-to-one. Here we're talking about defrauding and creating bogus charities and things of that nature. A lot of this is, legacy. If you've been given money to a university for 30 years after graduating, or however many years, I'd like to think you get a little more treatment for your kid and a little more consideration if their scores are within the proper lines.
Yep.
Now, if you start making up things that they did, well, I don't know, we've hit a weird gray area, but certainly, the idea that if you can help contribute to a college, because again, meritocracy, as everybody wants to call it, so come on, there's shades of gray in all of it.
Yep.
In terms of an admissions process, because you're trying to find a well-rounded student body and make it as diverse and inclusive as you can. And let's face it, not everybody peaks, gets to their near their ascent, finishing their ascent at age 17 or age 18. Like, I knew kids who were absolutely brilliant in the classroom, but they were the worst test takers you'd ever see.
Yep.
They'd absolutely freeze up. I had a girl that I went to high school with, straight A's, AP classes, you name it. Absolutely bombed the ACT.
Wow.
Absolutely bombed it. And shattered her world. She eventually got to take it again and did better, and with those test scores and everything she'd done, still I think went to the school she wanted to, or at least on the medal stand of, her final choices.
Okay.
But the test was not reflective of who she was in a classroom.
Sure.
And so, likewise, you can have the outlier. I was a great test taker. I was pretty good in the classroom, but I'd sit down because I couldn't study for it. I mean, you could study for the type of question and everything else. I'd kick my feet up and have fun.
Uh-huh.
And did pretty well that way. Everybody looks at those things a little differently. So to say that there's one way to get to a proper college, and look, there's enough seats as long as you can pay the bills.
Right.
Or somebody, or the government, or via loans and grants or whatever. As long as the bills are getting paid, they can always add a +1.
Additional thoughts on handicapping the race on Saturday, as well as if you have any thoughts whatsoever about any of the horses we didn't talk about, which I believe are, by my standards, Country House, War of Will, Long Range Toddy, Spinoff, Plucked Parfait, Cutting Humor, Gray Magician, Master Fencer. So, Jody, take it away, whether it be any thoughts on them, thoughts on handicapping the race, or anything we didn't really get to thus far.
Out of the group that we bypassed, the only one that I would consider using, and I'm not just going to go 3 deep, I'm going to use horses that you guys used in super practice and the like, but none of us touched on Spinoff. Todd Pletcher trained horse, late developer. I know Todd thought very highly of him last year, had some injury issues. They didn't get the
3-year-old campaign started till later than they wanted to, but he won down in Florida and ran a good second in Louisiana. I love the breeding. Hard Spun is one of my favorite sires, and I'm a Todd Pletcher guy. He hasn't had as much success in the Triple Crown races as he has over entire years when he's been the best trainer, right along with Bob Baffert in the entire country. But he has, over the last couple of years, at least broken through and been more of a factor in the Triple Crown races. If Spinoff got a piece of it, finishing third or fourth, just stays wide and gets a nice wide trip, I think it's bred to get the entire distance. So he might be able to get a suck-up third or fourth.
You were joking about it before, about being at your best at your age. You have the athleticism, as the world knows by now, to still do a Canadian Destroyer in the year 2019. I understand. I believe that was WrestleMania week when you broke that out. So it's remarkable that, again, that you can do that. You got the athleticism. You always had the athleticism back in the day, but grounded in the fundamentals. And fundamentals, that's what you got to teach these kids because, and it's been the way for at least 30 or 40 years. You watch it on TV, you think it's all about the spectacular moves, but it don't mean anything unless you can string a match together.
Well, you got that exactly right. We was mentioning earlier, and I'm going ahead and plug it now. If you go on Facebook, School of Morton. Now I have live YouTube shows that come on my School of Morton from my school. It's not about me. You hardly ever see me on the show. If it is, it's at the opening, or it's just a little video they're showing because I teach guys now. One of the great ones for the New Japan is Chase Owens in the Bullet Club. He's one of my boys that come from my school. Do you have a new upcomer, man? His name's Luscious Lawrence. He's going to be at the Ring of Honor shows that I'm on. It's what I don't teach them. It's great, but the art of our business is lost now. It's not being able. See, I was a baby face that sewed, and when I sewed, and they got the heat on me, I told a story to give Robert the hot tag and to go into the finish. And that's one thing that I really learned from Dusty Rhodes. Being there, I studied Dusty. Before we did angles, I'd sit down, and this is the reason a lot of bookers used themselves in their angles. It's because they knew what they wanted in their head, but they really couldn't get the guys in the business to understand what they're doing. And Dusty, and I got to say that he liked that. I understood what we were trying to do because, dude, I love this wrestling business, and I still love it. It's about that art of telling the story, having re-psychology. See, it's a lost art. I'll go, I'll watch these guys now, man, and one thing, I'll just go ahead and say it. One hot spot just goes to another hot spot. It don't mean nothing. A lot of times you can watch TV and one of the wrestlers is going to do a big move because there's 20 people on the floor to catch him. And I'm not trying to be mean. It's great. But when they learn how to tell that story and then put that big flying thing in there where it means something, that's really where they're really going to blow the roof off the buildings. That's where they're really going to get their ratings. It's like any business. I live here in Bristol, Tennessee. They have the NASCAR race here in town this weekend. And I was a big NASCAR fan, but now it's got to the same point. And I'm telling you, I don't know who's who in wrestling business. Everybody's got the same beard. Everybody's got the same haircut. Everybody wears the same things. It's just different color. I'm looking for that great character, that one great character. That's the reason Undertaker's so over. He's that great character that's different from everybody else. And plus, he can still work. See, I like that. And that's when I look at people. It's, the people that are creative and writing, you got to learn. It's a lot more to it than just going out and doing hot spots. You got to make. You remember we'd be on TBS and one of our matches, the TV would go off and we're still at our match.
Yep.
And the people wouldn't know what happened in that match to the next Saturday night.
Yeah.
At the ending of it, so they don't do that no more. They try to squeeze a 20-minute wrestling match into 5 minutes, and you can't do that. You've got to know who your top boys are, and it takes the underneath boys to put those top boys, and then vice versa. Every which way it goes, any way you get to go, everything's got to mean something. And if it don't, it's not. And I'm starting to see that a lot. I watched a new show the other day. They got kind of off into all the high spots, but then they settled it back and went back to the wrestling part.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part I love about it. A headlock routine and all the rest of the match is really cool.
Yeah.
It's a lost form of art. I see a lot of guys get lost in the match. And I always remember this. The guys out here listening to girl wrestler, whenever you get lost in the match, a headlock would cure everything. Just grab a headlock, start back over.
The Pac-12 has rarely sent anybody to the national championship game. I think the last time was Washington, and they didn't fare so well against Alabama. So, yeah, these are conferences that are kind of feeling the squeeze. And I'll tell you what, the ACC and the Big 12, there but for the grace of God, because if the ACC didn't have Clemson, they'd be just another conference. If the Big 12 didn't have Oklahoma, they'd be just another conference. But both of these schools have risen to that level in recent years, and they've been teams that have been able to get into the college football playoff, and I look for them to do it again.
Well, one thing, Rick, we need to happen is we need some of these other teams to step up. I think people are getting tired of seeing Clemson and Alabama every year in the championship. Let's get Michigan to step up. Let's get Oregon to step up. Let's see a little bit of parity.
Yeah.
I don't want to. It's a good matchup, but I'm tired of seeing it.
When you look at the things that are unforeseen in the summer of 2014, there's another thing that really kind of came up that I think would provide one of your biggest challenges that you would have leading into the convention, and that being, I believe it was in August of 2014, you had the first of these outbreaks in the different cities. This was Ferguson at this point, where there was the police shooting, there was unrest, and there would be an awful lot of that. I mean, there's a little bit of distance now. I don't think it's necessarily at the point where we forget, but the times between then and in 2016, it was really very fevered. You would have something happening every so often, and then unfortunately, right in the lead up to the convention, you had the shooting of the police officers in Dallas. There was, I believe, in Louisiana not long before then, there was an ambush. So as you're looking at this situation, this sort of societal pattern that's developing in the 2 years leading up to the convention, I have to say, I mean, from my perch of worrying about this for your sake and thinking, oh, please let this go well for Ed, and please let things, as all the friends and family were, as you well know, that was one of the foremost factors, I think, that we were looking at and thinking could be an issue. So as you're going through it, what's going through your head as far as the challenges that have been put out there by this whole kind of outbreak?
Well, it definitely was. It was quite a challenge, and we knew we were going to be on a worldwide stage, so we had to pay attention to what was going on, in the world and in the country. And Ferguson, Missouri was the start of something that I think had been brewing for a long time in urban centers around the country, and it just really kind of ignited a new way of doing things, and a new way that the public was voicing their opinion. So we had Ferguson, we had some issues in Baltimore, and then, as you mentioned before, right before the convention, we had some tragic events. So during our training, it was quite a challenge. I mean, there was no doubt about it. We had to train a different way. In the meantime, we were doing that. We were in the beginning stages of being monitored by the federal government, being placed under a consent decree by the U.S. Department of Justice. So there was a lot of moving parts, but the men and women in law enforcement are very, very resilient, and they were amenable to change, and we were committed to having a safe event.
The one thing with Boston with the goal differential, because I'm sitting here, nobody can see me doing this, but I'm making the on the one hand, on the other hand gesture, and I'm curious as to what you guys think weighs stronger in this. Not that either of these things is necessarily the determinative factor, but these are huge factors, huge advantages that each team has. For Boston, as you said, an almost historic goal differential advantage at this point. One of the very best of the 21st century of any of the playoff teams in there. So they've got that, and then St. Louis, on the other hand, they have a big advantage in terms of the whole rest v. rust kind of balance here. St. Louis is going to have some days off, probably just enough to get a little healthier, but not enough to get rusty. Boston has to worry about the rust because teams that are off as long as they have been historically have not done as well, or at least have gotten off to a rougher start. So isolating it just to those two factors, Steve, which team do you think benefits more from their advantage?
I think
a long layoff would bother me more if I had a younger team. But with a veteran team like Boston, I'm not worried about that. And I just look at their goaltending with Rask and how he's been. The St. Louis kids got all the ink, but I think Rask, for my money, has been the best goalie in the playoffs. He's 3-0 in elimination games, and he stopped 95 of 96 shots in elimination games. So when the money's on the line, he's been money.
As we bring the show to a close, we would like to extend our deepest gratitude to NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox, all Clear Channel affiliates, TNT, TBS, USA, UPN, Deadspin.com, YouTube.com, YTMND.com, MySpace.com, various blogs, Fox News, CNN, CNBC, MSNBC, IamBoard.com, Billboard.com, Google.com, ESPN, ESPN2, ESPN News, ESPN Classic, NBA TV, NFL Network, Sports Time Ohio, Athlon Magazine, Comedy Central, Cartoon Network, The Boomerang Channel, QVC, BET, The Spice Channel, Steno Notebooks, Manwich, Papermate Office Supplies, waitresses, strippers, bartenders, garbage men, janitors, microwave popcorn, the writers of The Office, Scrubs, Entourage, My Name is Earl, Oz, Metalocalypse and the Boondocks, Aquafina, and the periodic table of elements.